The Wyoming wind did not welcome strangers. It tested them. On the morning Maggie Ur arrived in Bitter Creek, the wind scraped across the land like a blade, lifting dust and slamming it against the wooden walls of the Sweetwater stage stop. The mountains in the distance were not soft or beautiful. They looked like broken teeth biting into a sky that felt too wide for comfort. Eli Mercer stood by the hitching post, his gloved hand resting on the smooth gray wood. He shifted his weight carefully. His left leg still ached from the accident 3 winters ago when a panicked horse had crushed him in a snowdrift. The pain never truly left. It was a reminder of everything he had lost. He was 34 years old, and he was waiting for a wife. The thought felt heavy in his chest. He had told himself he did not need one. After the blizzard that took Clara and the unborn child, he had buried the part of him that wanted softness. Love was dangerous in this country. Love could freeze to death in your arms. But the ranch was failing. The house echoed with silence, and a man could not fight the Wyoming wind alone forever. The stagecoach appeared as a small brown shape on the horizon. Then came the rumble of wheels and the tired breathing of horses. Eli straightened his coat, brushing dust from his vest. He felt foolish wearing his black Sunday coat, like a man dressing up for something he did not deserve. Sure, the coach stopped. The door opened. A traveling salesman stepped down first, then a miner, and finally, her. Maggie Ur stepped into the Wyoming dirt. Eli blinked. She was not what he expected. He had imagined a strong farm widow with thick arms and steady eyes. The letters she had written were practical and neat. They spoke of sewing skills, of work ethic, of willingness. Nothing romantic, nothing foolish. But Maggie was thin, not fragile, but lean in a way that spoke of hunger. While her gray wool dress was clean but worn, her trunk was small and battered. And when she turned toward him, he saw something in her face that made his chest tighten. Fear. Not loud fear, not tears, but the quiet, alert fear of someone who had learned to survive. "Miss Ur," Eli said. "Mr. Mercer," she replied. Her voice carried a soft Irish edge she tried to hide. They shook hands. Her fingers were rough. Needle scars lined her fingertips. Factory hands. City survival. They rode into town together in silence. Bitter Creek was a small line of wooden buildings fighting against the wind. When they passed down Main Street, conversation stopped. Men stared. Women whispered. "Mail-order bride," someone muttered. Maggie kept her chin high, but Eli felt the heat of shame crawl up his neck. He hated the way they looked at her, like she was something purchased from a catalog. They married that afternoon in the small church. No flowers, no music, no family. Just a tired preacher and empty pews. When Eli slid the thin gold ring onto her finger, his hand trembled. Not from doubt, but from memory. He had once placed a ring on another woman's hand, a woman who had died in snow because he had been too proud to listen. "I pronounce you man and wife." It was done. The ride to the ranch took the rest of the day. When they crested the final hill, Maggie saw it. The Mercer Ranch. The house sagged on one side. Fence lines were broken, but the windmill creaked like it was tired of turning. It did not look welcoming. It looked wounded. "It needs work," Eli muttered. "It is standing," Maggie answered quietly. "That is enough for a start." That night, after a silent supper, Eli showed her the bedroom. "You will sleep here," he said. "And you?" "I will sleep in the bunkhouse." The words fell between them like cold stones. Maggie felt it instantly. Rejection. Distance. The same judgment she had seen in men back in New York, that she knew what they thought of women who had survived by doing what they must. "Good night, Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice hard. He hesitated. "Call me Eli." "Good night, Eli." She lay in the large iron bed alone. The wind screamed against the walls. The room felt too big, the silence too wide. She pulled a small brass locket from her pocket and opened it. Her sister Sarah smiled back from the tiny picture. "I made it," Maggie whispered. "I am a wife." But her voice shook. In the bunkhouse, Eli did not sleep either. He stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind. He thought about the way her hands trembled when they shook. He thought about the fear in her eyes. He told himself he was doing the right thing by keeping distance. He told himself he could not lose another woman to this land. But as the night stretched long and cold, one truth settled heavily in his chest. The house did not feel empty anymore. And that terrified him more than the wind ever could. The first week on the Mercer ranch did not feel like a marriage. It felt like survival. Maggie learned quickly that Wyoming did not care about letters written in neat ink or promises made in a quiet church. It cared about strength, about water, about whether you could endure. The well sat 300 yards from the house, 300 yards of open wind and dust. And every morning she carried 2 heavy oak buckets across that distance again and again until her shoulders burned and her palms split open. She did not complain. Eli watched from the corral as she pumped the stiff iron handle with her full weight. Her dress clung to her back with sweat. Her hands, once skilled enough to stitch lace in a New York tenement, were now red and cracking from lye soap and cold water. He expected her to break. She did not. But when he finally stepped forward and took a wet shirt from her shaking hands, he saw the deep cut on her thumb. "Your hands are bleeding," he said. "It is nothing," she answered quickly, hiding them behind her apron. He wanted to take her hands, to wrap them in cloth, to tell her she did not have to prove anything. Instead, he hung the shirt on the line and said, "I will haul the water tomorrow." She stiffened. "I am not an invalid." "I know," he replied quietly. But I need you mending grain sacks in the barn. That takes skill." He walked away before he said something softer. He always walked away. In the barn that afternoon, one of the ranch hands leaned against a stall and smirked at her. "So the boss finally got himself a catalog bride," the man called Shorty said, loud enough for the others to hear. The barn fell quiet. Maggie did not lower her eyes. She stood, walked to Shorty's torn saddlebag, and picked it up. Your gear is falling apart," she said calmly. "If you treat your horse like this leather, I pity the animal." Shorty blinked. She sat back down and threaded heavy twine through the torn buckle. "Bring it here," she told him. "I will fix it, but you oil it after, unless you prefer riding like a fool." Gus, the older foreman, laughed sharply. Shorty turned red and handed it over. From the shadows near the tack room, Eli watched. She had not needed him, while that stirred something in his chest that felt like pride. 2 days later, the sky changed. It turned copper. The wind died. The air felt wrong. "Inside!" Eli shouted as the wall of dust came racing across the prairie. The storm hit like a solid wave. Brown grit swallowed the sun. The house shook as if giant hands were trying to rip it apart. They sealed the windows with wet rags. They pushed heavy furniture against the doors. The air inside grew thick and hard to breathe. When night fell, the temperature dropped like a stone. The stove fire struggled. The floor turned to ice beneath their feet. "I will sleep here," Eli said, spreading his coat on the rug near the stove. "You will freeze," Maggie answered. "I have slept in snowbanks." "And I am freezing," she said, her voice sharp with fear. "The quilt is heavy enough for 2. I ask only for warmth." He hesitated. Then he stood. They lay stiff on the iron bed. a foot of cold sheet between them. The wind howled outside like something alive. "I hate the wind," Maggie whispered into the dark. "It wears a man down," Eli replied. "It sounds like New York," she said softly. "Noise that never stops." Silence stretched. Then the truth came. "My parents died when I was 12, she said. "Cholera. My sister and I worked in a factory. The landlord offered help. I did what I had to do so she could eat." Her voice trembled, but did not break. "They say I am dirty," she continued. "Maybe they are right." Eli turned toward her in the dark. "You are not dirty," he said roughly. "You survived." Then he spoke of Clara, of the blizzard, of the wagon tipping, of holding his pregnant wife's hand while she froze beneath the weight of the world he had insisted she face. "I killed her," he whispered. "I hear her screaming when the wind blows." Maggie reached under the quilt and found his hand. "You are not half a man," she said fiercely. "You are carrying a mountain." For a moment, the space between them vanished. He leaned close. His forehead touched hers. Heat and breath and grief mixed together. He almost kissed her. Then the wind slammed against the shutters, and he pulled away. "I cannot," he rasped. She turned onto her side, wounded, but understanding. The next morning, yet the storm was gone, so was some of the distance between them. Days passed. Then Silas Crane arrived. He drove a polished black buggy straight into the yard like he owned the land. His suit was too clean for Wyoming. His smile too sharp. "I hear your little bride is from New York," Silas said smoothly, letting the words hang heavy. Maggie met his gaze without flinching. He turned to Eli. "You are behind on payments. 3 months. But then I want access to your creek for my cattle." "That creek is mine," Eli replied. Silas's eyes flicked toward Maggie. "It would be a shame," he said lightly, "if certain rumors about your wife reached the bank." The threat settled like poison in the air. After Silas left, Maggie stood beside Eli in the barn. "It's too big," she whispered. Eli's heart dropped. He thought she meant the land, the hardship, that she was leaving. "I won't hold you here," he said hoarsely, and she turned to him, eyes blazing. "That is not what I mean." She stepped closer. "This life is too big for one man to carry alone. You are trying to hold the ranch, the debt, your guilt, and me like I am made of glass." "I am your husband," he said. "I need a partner," she answered. She grabbed his sleeve. "Teach me the accounts. Show me how to shoot. Show me how Silas is cheating us. Do not leave me small in a life this big." He stared at her. Something in him shifted. You mean it," he said softly. "I have never meant anything more." He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers trembled. "You are stronger than I am, Maggie." She leaned into his touch. "I am just tired of being afraid." He kissed her then. Not gently, not politely. It was desperate and hungry and alive. For a moment, the wind, the debt, the ghosts all vanished. When they broke apart, breathing hard, he held her face in his hands. "If we do this," he said, that voice thick, "it will be because we are ready, not because we are scared." She nodded. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. And for the first time since she stepped off that stagecoach, the Mercer Ranch did not feel like a place she was surviving. It felt like something she was fighting for. The war for the Mercer Ranch did not begin with thunder. It began with silence. One morning, Eli rode to the north pasture and found 3 calves missing. But their tracks led straight toward Silas Crane's land. When he rode farther, he found a crude dam built across the creek, diverting water away from his fields. He tore it down with his bare hands. 2 days later, it was rebuilt, this time guarded by armed men. Silas was no longer hiding. Then the night came when the sky turned orange. The Svensson's barn burned to the ground. Flames climbed into the dark like a warning. The town whispered that Eli's cattle had spooked the lantern. The sheriff listened more closely to Silas than to the truth. Maggie felt the valley closing in. 3 nights later, the herd stampeded. Gunshots cracked from the ridge. Horses screamed. 200 head of cattle thundered toward the ranch house. One rider hurled a torch onto the porch. The wood caught fast. Maggie ran for water while Eli and the men fought to turn the herd. Billy, the youngest hand, fell beneath pounding hooves. By dawn, the porch was charred black. Billy was dead, and the sheriff rode in with handcuffs. "Eli Mercer, you are under arrest." "For what?" Maggie cried. "For criminal negligence, and for threatening Mr. Crane." It was a lie. But lies carried weight when backed by money. They dragged Eli away. That evening, Silas Crane came to the burned house. He stood in the ruined parlor like he was inspecting cattle. "I can make this disappear," he said smoothly. "Sign the ranch over. Declare your marriage void. Come work in my house." "You have experience in survival." His hand touched her face. That was his mistake. Maggie drove her knee into him and clawed his cheek until blood streaked down his fine collar. "I would rather die in the dirt," she hissed, "than belong to a man like you." He fled, promising ruin. 2 hours later, Deputy Miller brought Eli back for 5 minutes. 5 stolen minutes in the barn. They held each other like drowning people clutching driftwood. "But you are not leaving me," Maggie said fiercely. "I love you," Eli whispered, "and I love you." They came together not from fear, but from defiance. In the dark, on the hay, they chose each other completely. When the deputy returned, Eli walked back to jail with his head high. The next morning, Maggie learned of a federal judge holding court 3 days south in Granite Peak. Without telling the town, she saddled Bess and rode. The Badlands were brutal. Heat cracked the earth. The wind hissed through narrow stone passes. She rode until her thighs burned and her throat went dry. 10 miles from Granite Peak, a shot split the air. Silas had sent riders. Bullets shattered stone near her head. She slid from the saddle and hid behind a boulder, Colt revolver shaking in her hand. "Come out, Mrs. Mercer," a man called from the ridge. She remembered Eli's voice. "Breathe. Squeeze. Do not pull." She fired. Missed. She fired again, while the lead rider jerked backward and fell. The second opened fire. A bullet tore through her upper arm. She mounted Bess with blood soaking her sleeve and rode until the world blurred. She collapsed near a small trickle of water beneath a limestone overhang. That was where Eli found her. He had escaped the jail with help from Gus. He followed her blood trail through rock and dust. When he saw her lying pale against the stone, something inside him nearly broke. "You stubborn woman," he whispered, cleaning her wound. "Partners," she murmured weakly. "Do not wait for the end." He held her through the night, rifle in hand, daring the world to try again. 2 days later, they stood before Judge Thaddeus Blackwood. Maggie told the truth. All of it. The tenement, the landlord, the fire that killed her sister, the threats, the dam, the stampede. "I will not be owned again," she said, her voice steady despite her sling. Eli spoke of Clara, of grief, of mistakes, of Silas's corruption. Judge Blackwood listened. Then he rode back to Bitter Creek with federal marshals. The church filled with townspeople. Silas sat in the front pew, face pale but defiant. Witnesses stood. The peddler testified. The Svensson widow spoke. Then Shorty, the same man who once mocked Maggie, stood and said he had seen Silas's rider throw the torch. Silas snapped. He reached into his coat and fired. Eli shoved Maggie down. A marshal's rifle answered. Silas Crane fell to the church floor. Dead. Silence filled the sanctuary. The judge dismissed the charges against Eli. He ordered the bank ledgers examined. Silas had been inflating interest for years. The debt shrank to something manageable. The town did not cheer. But they stepped aside when Eli and Maggie walked past. Respect had replaced whispers. Rebuilding took months, and they replaced the porch with strong cedar beams, dug the well deeper, mended fences tighter than before. Maggie worked beside the men, hammer in hand, skirts tucked up, daring anyone to question her place. One evening, as summer faded into gold, Eli and Maggie rode to the ridge above the ranch. The valley stretched wide below them. Smoke rose from the chimney. Cattle grazed in long shadows. Toby, the orphan boy they had taken in after the fires, they walked the fence with a stick in his hand, like a young rancher already. The sky was enormous. Maggie leaned into Eli. "It's too big," she whispered again. Eli smiled this time. "Too big for what?" "Too big for shame," she said softly. "Too big for small men and smaller rumors. Too big for fear." She looked at him. "But it is big enough for us." He pulled her close and kissed her slowly, unhurried. The wind still blew. The mountains were still sharp, when the land was still vast and unforgiving. But they were not small anymore. They had faced fire, bullets, and the ghosts